So it's a fallacy to believe that you don't have the vulnerability or to try to hide your vulnerability from yourself. You may well try to hide it from others, but you can never hide your vulnerabilities from yourself. And when you do that, you're only lying. And the more that you lie to yourself and the more that you are okay with lying to yourself, the bigger your house of cards becomes. And it's not easy to come back once a huge house of cards has fallen. It's much better to acknowledge your weaknesses along the way, fix the ones that you can, and appreciate the ones that you can't. Some of the weaknesses that you have won't be resolved in this lifetime, and that would be okay. So the only thing that you can do is acknowledge them. Hey, Strength of Seduction family. This is Daniel, and if you're listening to this episode, there's a good chance that you're already a Strength of Seduction customer. The reality is, most people purchased our Strength of Seduction workouts back during the pandemic because they were really fun to do in the house and they looked exciting, and you wanted to build intimacy with your partner. You wanted to build connection with your partner. But over the past few years, we've realized that just doing the workouts is really fun, it's engaging, and it's interesting, but it's not really what we were trying to get at with our programming. What we intended to do is to create something that would help you to transform your life and your marriage. And it's taken us a few years to figure out what exactly that means. And we didn't do it alone. We did it by talking to you. Over the past few years, we've talked to over 20,000 couples, Black couples in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, who've gone through it all, who've seen the ups and downs of life, who've gone through all the struggles, who've actually achieved happiness. And what we learned was really shocking. We learned that there are 4 key elements that all relationships must have strong. They must have on lock in order to make that relationship thrive. And we took those 4 elements and we designed a program around those elements to help support Black couples in a way we've just never seen done before. And what we came up with was called Love and Legacy. And it's the first and only program in the world created from speaking privately with thousands of couples just like us about the biggest challenges in our life and relationship. And it's actually a proven system designed to help Black couples upgrade our life and our marriage. Now, this is not open to the public yet. If you're listening to this, like I said, you're most likely already a member of our community. And that's why we'd like to tell you about it first. You can apply and you can learn more at strengthofseduction.com/legacy. This is a private page. And I look forward to hearing from you because the reality is there isn't a lot of talk about what makes our marriages work, what makes our marriages thrive. What I've seen when I'm doing my research is that there's still a big stereotype that our marriages don't last, they don't work, that they're non-existent. And that's certainly not the case. In the Love and Legacy community, we have members who've been married for 20, 30, 40 years, and they're still going strong. And yet they're still interested in learning more and digging deeper and showing up better as partners and individuals. So if that's you, go ahead and check us out, strengthofseduction.com/legacy to learn more about this new program that we're launching. And enjoy today's episode. This is the Strength of Seduction podcast, the #1 resource for Black couples who want to build intimacy, love, and connection in their relationship. I'm your host, Daniel DiPiazza. My friends, welcome back to the Strength of Seduction podcast, the #1 resource for Black couples who want to build love, intimacy, and connection in their marriage. I'm your host, Daniel DiPiazza. If you are new here, you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for updates. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast platform like Apple or Spotify, make sure to subscribe and to leave a review. Every review counts. We really appreciate you. Now, today we have an incredible episode. Today is all about emotional vulnerability. This is something that I think is very useful to address because when it comes down to it, the quality of your relationship is going to be, the quality of your relationship in your marriage is going to come down to the quality of relationship you have with yourself. That might sound cliche, it might sound even confusing, but I'm sure you've heard the phrase before, you can't love anybody more than you love yourself. And you really can't love yourself unless you can be honest with yourself. It comes down to understanding your emotions. And certainly I've noticed that within the Black community, a lot of Black men have a hard time even accessing their emotions. I can talk more about this in a different episode, but this is something that I have struggled with between myself and my dad, learning how to talk about the things that are going on with us and getting clearance and getting closure around things that have happened to us, that have happened to the family. There's family trauma around all types of relationships, kids and parents, between spouses, and these things need to be addressed, and it starts with emotional vulnerability. So today's episode, I'm titling it The Emotional Dummy. It's about learning yourself. I'm going to read a little bit of something that I wrote that I think will help and support you and give you some of my feedback on how I think we can all help to navigate the waters of dealing with our emotions better. This is really useful. Now, when it comes to emotional vulnerability and how it affects your marriage, there's something I wanted to share with you. We are working with couples, specifically with Black married couples, to support them in all these areas. So if you want to build stronger communication, if you want to build better health, deeper intimacy, and create more money in your family, then you need to learn about love and legacy. This is our breakthrough program for Black married couples who want to level up in all areas of their life, who want to stop the idea that divorce is an option and actually live a happy, successful, fulfilling marriage. If you're curious to learn more about how this could help you and your partner in your marriage, go to strengthofseduction.com/apply to learn more, where you'll be able to see a short video, hear from our community members who have really been benefiting from this breakthrough program, and have a chance to apply to be one of the few members that we accept. All right, now let's get into today's program. So, just some context for today. For me recently, and just being straight up, I've been feeling a little bit down. I've been dealing with some depression, I've been dealing with just some mental trash. And there's no one specific cause for it. I think that whenever you're going through a low point in life, it's always an amalgamation of things. But for me, I've just been feeling like, I'm putting out a lot of energy and I'm tired, man. I've been working hard for over a decade and without pretty much any rest, and I'm exhausted. And oftentimes I'll feel like I'm not getting what I feel like my just due is. And so over the past couple months, I've just been like, why am I doing this? What is it all for? And you just get that build up. And so what I'm actually doing this weekend is I'm going to the mountains, to a cabin. I'm taking my dad with me, and we're going to do some mushrooms and sit in a hot tub and just do nothing for a few days. And that's how I'm like starting to address it. And I'm going to work on building some more off time into my life and just rearrange some things, and I'm gonna work through it. But yeah, it's been a struggle, and I've been, or sometimes I'll just be going throughout the day and I'll just randomly feel like I want to cry right now. Just no reason. I feel like crying, which is like odd because I don't normally feel like that. So I think part of it is noticing too when you're feeling down, not just bypassing that. And also part of it is talking to people. So rather than stuffing it down, actually having a conversation of, yeah, I'm not feeling 100% mentally healthy right now. I feel bad. But being okay with that, not being like, oh, I have to hide this or I have to put on some sort of strong face, which I think is probably pretty common in a lot of people's lives, but especially if you're like a public figure, a public facing person. People don't really want to talk about depression, although it is becoming more common to talk about now. And of course, on the show, we've talked about things like holotropic breathwork. We just talked about that last week. We've talked about psychedelic therapy. We've talked about, and by the way, I'm not opposed to talk therapy or regular therapy either. I think that's all great. They're all part of the tools. And so I'm going to use all the tools that I talk about on the show to move through difficult, painful, sticky points. And also, whenever you're dealing with emotions, labeling them as negative emotions sometimes I think makes you feel bad about yourself. So you already feel depressed, and then you feel bad about feeling depressed because it's a negative emotion. But that's you classifying something unnecessarily. You can say something is a difficult emotion, but it doesn't make it a negative emotion because, as I was listening to Alan Watts the other day, everything has its polar opposite. And in order for there to be good, there has to be bad. You don't see a wave with just a crest. There has to be like a trial too. There has to be the underside and the overside. There has to be the yin and the yang. It doesn't make sense to suppress the real thing you're feeling and try to put on a front because that doesn't actually erase it. It just stuffs it down further. And it doesn't help it to heal. You got to expose the thing. You got to feel it to heal it. I think that's a phrase that's been used. So I was reflecting on that today, and I was thinking really how far I'd come in being able to express that. As a kid, I didn't grow up with I didn't feel like I grew up with a lot of emotional intelligence. Maybe other people would feel differently, but I felt certainly it's been a long time coming for me to be able even to identify if I feel depressed. Some people, because they don't have any awareness of what depression would be, or they don't have any familiarity with the feelings, or maybe they've been depressed their whole lives and they don't know how to classify it. They don't even identify with that feeling. And so I think that's the first thing. It's like being emotionally aware of what you're feeling at that time. And so I was writing on this, and I wrote a short piece today called The Emotional Dummy. And it talks a bit about my growth in emotional maturity, which has taken me a little bit longer than maybe I thought it would have over the years. But I'll just read it to you now, and I'll give some commentary at the end. This is called The Emotional Dummy. I'm embarrassed to admit that I was emotionally dumb until the age of 30. I knew what emotions were supposed to look and feel like from watching other people experience them, but my reservoir was empty. I didn't feel, I performed. If I had to empathize with somebody, I would do my best to emulate the response that I thought would stop their emotional leak because I didn't have any tools to deal with the spillage. Even if I'd wanted to, I couldn't relate from a real place. I was never cold to life, simply uninitiated. I didn't know myself. The night my grandmother died, I learned that emotions are not solid rocks, they're liquid magma. They course through you like a scorching wave. I shut myself in the bathroom and felt myself crumble to the floor in a tide of deep and unrestrained hurt. I felt my heart palpitate in my chest and stop as a searing pain ripped through my entire body. I felt the shell of my physical body crack open and become an empty husk as my soul exited like a mortal mist from a gaping wound. I felt. Over a period of years, the deep-seated pain actually healed me because it fixed something I didn't know was broken. It showed me that I had range. I realized that it felt bad not to feel, even if the feeling itself was bad. Emotions resonate inside of us like a note. Some tones are discordant, but that doesn't negate their validity. They can only be what they are. Musicians learn scales so that they can fully express the beauty of their chosen instrument. Why should you go your entire life without knowing how to play the totality of your human instrument? As a kid, I was taught through example that the best way to deal with complicated feelings was to beat them into submission with logic, then power through them with assertive action. I think many people relate to this approach. It works until it doesn't. The world will say that nobody cares about your emotions. Just work harder. What goes unmentioned is that there's precisely one person in the world to which your emotions are paramount. You. I maintained a posture that I thought was making me stronger, but it was actually making me weaker. I thought I was showing up for others by constantly remaining focused and unfazed, but I was really hiding from myself. No more. Now, I'm happy to be sad, if that's the truth of the moment. When you are both the orchestra and the audience, you can only smile at the symphony. And so this is my description of how I became emotionally aware. And one of the things I think is important is that men specifically will often feel like they're not able to be vulnerable because that will create some sort of weakness or that will show a weakness and that will create a vulnerability for others to either attack them or for them to be perceived as less than or all these things. But even if you want to take it out of the context of emotions and you want to talk about just physical weakness, and we can go back to my favorite topic or one of my favorite topics, which is fighting, it would be stupid for you to go into a fight and to not acknowledge your own weaknesses because your weaknesses are the things that you are able to address to improve. And they're also the things that you're able to shield from the enemy. And you have to be aware of where those weaknesses are. And you have to be fully in tune with your body in order to overcome those weaknesses. And similarly, with your mind and your heart, you have to be aware of those weaknesses, embrace them and acknowledge them in order to improve them and heal them. Otherwise, you're just being foolish. Or if you have someone in a fight who you see who's completely unafraid, that person is more vulnerable than someone who does have a healthy amount of fear. Because someone who doesn't believe that they're vulnerable is blind to exactly where they are vulnerable because everybody is vulnerable. So it's a fallacy to believe that you don't have the vulnerability or to try to hide your vulnerability from yourself. You may well try to hide it from others, but you can never hide your vulnerabilities from yourself. And when you do that, you're only lying. And the more that you lie to yourself and the more that you are okay with lying to yourself, the bigger your house of cards becomes. And it's not easy to come back once a huge house of cards has fallen. It's much better to acknowledge your weaknesses along the way, fix the ones that you can, and appreciate the ones that you can't. Some of the weaknesses that you have won't be resolved in this lifetime, and that would be okay. So the only thing that you can do is acknowledge them. And it doesn't make you any less of a man or a woman for acknowledging where you lack, where you've made a mistake, where things have happened that haven't gone your way. I think oftentimes of one of my favorite authors, Nassim Taleb, who talks about the concept of being anti-fragile. And a lot of men are, of course, afraid of appearing fragile. And he talks about the idea of different archetypes for a career. So you have a doctor, you have a police officer, you have a firefighter. These are all, or even a corporate lawyer. These are all careers that have some sort of like a uniform. The doctor wears the white coat, the police officer has the uniform, the lawyer wears the suit. And these are wrappers of the person. They're packaging of a person, but they don't actually show who that person is. They just represent an image. And if that person does something that isn't in line with that image, the doctor does something foolish, the lawyer does something out of character, etc., people will look at them and say, "Oh, that person has failed. That person's not acting in alignment with what they're projecting." But of course, they were just projecting something that wasn't really showing their true character. It was just a projection of what they thought other people wanted to see. And so in that way, by them trying to be hard and rigid, they become vulnerable because they don't have any flexibility. They don't have any ability to change their behaviors or opinions. They don't have any ability to act out of character because there's only one way that they can act according to whatever that archetype says. Now, of course, you have then the artist, and the artist has no uniform. The artist shows up in paint splotched shirt and sandals and sunglasses, and they just do their work. And you can't accuse the artist of not being who they say they are because the artist can change who that person is anytime. You can look at a Kanye West, for example. You either think he's a good example or you don't, but he's sure an artist. And it's hard to have any expectations of Kanye because his opinion and his views of himself probably change as much as yours change of him. He's constantly changing, constantly fluid, constantly evolving or devolving, however you see it, but never the same. And for that reason, you might love him one year and hate him the next, but it's hard to pin down exactly what he'll say or do. And there's a certain freedom to that because he can't be held accountable to be or act a certain way since he's never had a consistent way of being or acting for the whole time you've ever known about him. And there's a value to that because he's not held down by some sort of traditional viewpoint, traditional worldview, traditional way of being viewed. And that gives freedom and power in a certain way because he's able to admit his vulnerabilities. He's able to, in public, have a breakdown if that's what he needs to have. He's able to completely change his musical style. He's able to completely change his life. And that has to be okay because people don't have a rigid expectation of him. And in that way, he's anti-fragile. In that way, he's also uncancelable because there's nothing that he can do that would be so bad, most likely, that he would get canceled forever, right? Whereas there are people who, I'm sure you can think of your own personal examples, but there are people who are so married to the image that they've already projected that if they're to break that character, break that image, people wouldn't be able to accept their truth. They wouldn't be able to accept the reality of who they are because there's such a fixed notion of what they're supposed to be, who they're supposed to act like, what they're supposed to do. And that in a way creates fragility because you want to have flexibility. Even if you look at the Tao says something to the effect that I'm paraphrasing of the straight reed gets broken in the wind, the gnarled one bends and is able to survive getting cut. And the whole idea is that if you're flexible, if you're soft, softness survives because it's flexible. Rigidness, hardness is brittle and crumbles. You can make a jujitsu analogy about this too, which I'm not going to go into too much, but it's like the idea of constant movement, constant change, constant refreshing of your position. You're never in just one place. You're always moving to the next position. You're always changing shape. And that creates some safety for you because in softness, there's actually safety. When you cling to things and those things don't materialize, it creates a situation where things can fall apart because of the expectations of yourself that are unmet or the expectations that others have of you that are unmet. So my hope for you is that by just expressing where I'm at right now, and of course I'm going to pull through this and I'll continue to work through it and I'm still going to keep doing the podcast and then we'll have good days and we'll have bad days. But my hope for you is that by listening to this, you gain some ability to connect with what you're actually feeling and be able to develop your own EQ, your own emotional intelligence first so that you can analyze honestly where you are. And so that if you're not feeling your best, you can admit that to yourself. And secondly, so that you can talk to others about it. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been telling people candidly, I'm not feeling great right now. I'm going through some depression. And I'm not trying to get people to feel bad for me. I don't want them to say, oh, I'm so sorry. What can I do? That's not why I'm saying that. But if people ask me how I am, I'll just tell them, yeah, I'm all right. I'm dealing with some depression right now. Because it's if you had a broken arm, if someone asks you how you're doing, you could say, I'm okay, but I have a broken arm. That's not a lie. It's just the truth of it. It doesn't mean that your arm won't heal either, but it's just the truth of it. So if you have an emotional injury or a psychological injury, it's okay to admit that to somebody. It's okay to say, all right, I'm not doing great right now. It doesn't mean that you won't heal from it, but it's an honest answer. And I think that every time that someone asks you how you're doing and you just, without thinking, say, oh, I'm fine, doing great, doing awesome, you're lying, and that reinforces the fact that you're stuffing it down, which doesn't feel good. And this is some of the beef that I have with positive psychology, which I'm obviously a fan of positive psychology. Hell, we do affirmations that are positive psychology. When you're affirming positive things about you, that is positive psychology. So there is a certain amount of brainwashing you can do to yourself which will affect you positively. But you shouldn't brainwash yourself to the point where you don't actually acknowledge your emotions. And I think that's what I was doing before I hit my 30s, really, or really my late 20s. When my grandmother died, like I mentioned in the piece, that's when I really started to crack open and feel, oh wow, there's a deeper well of emotion here that can be accessed. And it's not all nice stuff, but it's definitely in there. And it deserves to be talked about. It does exist, and I do feel it. And I don't have to pretend like it's not there. And I'm not going to attempt to brainwash it to manually override it. That's not going to be useful for me. I should feel it. And I recovered from that, and I still will feel that sometimes. I recovered from that, and I will recover from this low point as well. But all that to say, acknowledge who you are. Don't be afraid to ask for help from people. Don't be afraid to lean on those close to you and be open and honest with them and be receptive to support.
That is it for the Strength of Seduction podcast today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you love listening to us on. Leave a review on Apple or Spotify, please. Every single review helps. Every single review counts. Now, if you want to learn more about how you can get support in your marriage, you can improve the intimacy, improve the communication, get healthier together, get stronger together, get more financially secure together, make sure to go to strengthofseduction.com/apply to learn about Love and Legacy, our signature coaching program for Black married couples. Now, as I always say, my friends, love fiercely, communicate openly, and always find your way back to each other. This is Daniel. I'll catch you next time on the Strength of Seduction podcast. Peace.